What's up, Gromies? Welcome to AROYA Office Hours, your source for free cannabis cultivation education. I'm your moderator Rachel, and this is episode 118. Shout out to our live viewers on YouTube and Instagram, and to everyone tapping in on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, or wherever you listen to the podcast. Thank you for your support, and if you like the pod, drop us a review. We'd appreciate your feedback. Jason, it's great to be with you again. Cian, so glad you could join us. Cian, what are you going to show us today?
Well, so over the last, I'd say, 2 weeks, I've had a ton of contact with customers about issues that relate to the power sources that are used to power both their climate station and their gateway. And as a result of just how much contact I've had on that subject in the past 2 weeks, I wanted to just share a really simple couple of diagrams with everyone about how to diagnose some of those power issues that may help everyone be able to understand some of those a little bit easier. So this one's pretty simple. This is the diagram of the PoE injector, and this is going to be the little power plug injector that you use to power your climate station as well as your gateways. And as this diagram shows, the bottom of this injector is labeled. This one's labeled data in, power out. Some of the newer ones are going to be labeled in and out. Some of the older ones may say, I want to say WLAN in and WLAN in and PoE out. But whatever version you have, it's going to look something similar to this, and it's going to have these two ports on the bottom of it. One thing to note about these two ports is that this port that I've got circled here is the only one that is able to send power to your device. So if you're plugging in a climate station, for example, and you use this port over here on the left of the device, it is going to end up not providing any power to that device. And that may well be one of those first things that a lot of people can go check if you're diagnosing a power issue on your own. The second one that I wanted to be able to share to everybody is this next little guy here. And this thing is the PoE injector's little fun buddy. Everyone sees these when they come out of the box attached to their climate stations, and oftentimes we get questions as whether or not it's an antenna or what exactly it's doing. Once you get set up, everyone realizes this is a protected Ethernet cable. So basically, what you're seeing here is the end on this left side that goes to your device, climate station connector. And this center piece here is the coupling. On either side of this coupling, there's going to be a female port for this Ethernet cable, your PoE connector, and one matching on the other side. If either of these two ports end up getting disconnected or have just a poor connection to begin with, you may end up experiencing intermittent or sustained power issues. One thing I've talked to a lot of people about lately is just unscrewing each side of this coupling gently and being able to then extract the cables from that housing. And then once they've extracted them, inspect the terminals to make sure that nothing is looking corroded or marred up in there. And once you've finally finished that, just click them back into place until you hear that audible click and feel a good connection in there. That should initiate power, and you should start seeing signs of that on your devices really quickly as soon as you've established a solid connection with your PoE injector.
Hey, I got a question. While we're still here, thanks for breaking that down. It's very helpful information. How do we know if we are trying to diagnose a power issue on the climate station? Is there a light on it? Can we hear the fan? What are easy signs there?
Well, some of the easiest signs you're going to see, especially with the newer climate stations that have that aspirated feature with them, there's a running fan inside that climate station that's going to be running all the time. And so you can go over to them, and often I find that in the noisy rooms, the easiest way to identify this is to look up at the unit from the bottom. And if you see the fan unit sitting stationary inside the bottom of that unit, you're going to know that you don't have power running to that unit at the time. You can also oftentimes hold that unit a little bit in your hand and feel that fan unit running inside of the newer climate stations. Now, the older models, they have, at least in some of the older models that I'm used to, have a little blue light that appears on the side on the body of the climate station once it's been powered on. Other symptoms you may check if you think you may be experiencing a power issue, you might go to just your dashboard page and take a look to see if you have any communication statuses from those devices in that page. If you're missing your sensor communication status, that's not necessarily a signifier of a power outage to the device. It may just be an issue with the sensor unit on that device itself. The power, though, if you have an issue with that, you'll see 2 red check marks next to those communication statuses in that listed location in your device page. And if you see both those 2 red check marks, you are likely experiencing some sort of a power failure with that device.
All right, thanks. Jason, how's it going?
Good.
Ready for some questions?
I sure am.
All right. From Instagram, Hooker asks, "Hey all, I almost never get the chance to catch one live. I was wondering about VPD. Is it safer to drop my humidity during lights off if I'm facing PM pressure, or is it better to keep it stable? In other words, would the plant be better off resisting by being healthier with a more stable VPD, or what's the best approach?"
Yeah, so we do want to try and keep our VPD stable. Typically during daytime, we're trying to optimize VPD for plant growth to make sure that we're getting as much transpiration of those plants as possible. The caveat there is definitely later in the cycle as we've got mature buds and more localized humidity environments near those buds, is try and keep that VPD, above 1 at night, absolutely, and sometimes usually up to like 1.4 during the day. If you still are seeing PM pressures, you can up it at night even farther. As far as humidity, so one of the main challenges that people see is obviously towards the end of the cycle, we've got a lot of transpiration. The plants are adding a lot of water to the environment in there, and in general, we like applying a nighttime temperature differential, so dropping the temperature as we get into nights. Sometimes dehumidifiers don't have the capacity to decrease the humidity, right? Because if we decrease our temperatures, we need to decrease the humidity as well to maintain that stable VPD. So a lot of times, people come into those challenges where we have to start to mitigate, well, how much temperature drop can I get if at the limited capacity of my dehums, for example. And so that's one of those areas where you definitely have to take into consideration what your facility is capable of, how hard you're trying to drive those drops, and basically what PM pressures are existing. So when we talk about reducing chances of PM, healthy plants, sterile growing rooms, and keeping those VPDs up, those are all great options in order to try and reduce the chances that. And some genetics are just more predisposed to getting powdery mildew. Others are extremely resistant of it. So it's going to be case by case basis. But as far as stable VPD, we're always trying to do that. Yes.
Thanks for that info. You'll have to let us know if that answered your question or if you have any follow-ups. Dimu Garden writes, "How many times should I top a plant in 10-gallon pots with a 6-week veg time?"
Sure. So for me, I try to never top plants. That anytime we're topping a plant, we're cutting off value that we've put time and energy and nutrients, other resources into growing that plant. So I guess some of the questions there are, if you're growing in a 10-gallon, typically we'd be trying to grow a very large plant anyways. And so for me, my answer is 0, right? Let's use other control factors. If we need to limit the plant height on that, then maybe let's reduce the frequency of irrigations or change some of our environmental factors to help reduce that. And at the very least, if you have no other choices, I prefer just pinching or bending rather than topping, because at least then we haven't disposed of all that value.
All right. That's great info. Menez Martin wants to know, with bigger pots, are we supposed to veg longer, right? What time would you say for a 10-gallon?
It comes back to what your ideal plant height is, ideal plant size. Anytime that we are trying to grow a much bigger plant, and like I says, with a 10-gallon, hopefully you're growing like 8-foot plants. Otherwise, you probably are just using a little bit too much media than you have to. Every once in a while, if you're in living soil, then sure, a 10-gallon is nice because then you've got a little bit more root zone to build a healthy organic conditions in that substrate. However, if you are in a traditional hydroponic situation, then if we are in something like a 10-gallon, then yeah, to make the most advantage of that 10-gallon pot, we need to be growing really big plants. And if that is the case, yes, a lot of times it does take more veg time to grow a substantially larger plant. However, regardless of substrate size, the amount of veg time that we have or that we should be applying to this plant is really related to how big a plant we're trying to grow.
Yeah, it's giving me the same thing I was exactly going to say. How big is that plant going to need to get, and use that as a proportional judgment call. Do you add 1 week, you add 2 weeks, really depends on just how much plant matter you're trying to have that specific pot grow.
Yeah, and this is where some typical SOPs that I always try recommending, track your plant height. All right, every other day, every 3 days at the least, get that in AROYA, get that in a Grow Journal, Excel sheet, however you capture that information. The nice thing about doing it in a system like AROYA is we can start plotting that against our crop steering phases, right? And so for me, with probably some of the most important time frames of getting that plant height is into veg, right? Anytime that I'm trying to have a predictable plant size by the end of flower, I need to know how tall was it when I switched from my 18.6 to my 12.12 light cycle. And then I also definitely really like to keep track of my plant height through stretch. And typically I try to align my generative stacking phase with how much, the amount of stretch time that this plant goes through. A lot of times is that at that daily rate of plant height starts to slow down, then I can think about switching to bulking.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with everything you just said. And I only want to add that I actually stole, I think, what is an idea of yours, Jason, that I heard originally on this podcast quite a while back, which was installing a nice, big, tall ruler that's 4 feet tall in my room that has a camera pointed at it. And every day when I check some things and take any manual readings, I'll take a look and kind of see what that looked like. And like, oh, nice. Okay. It's an inch taller today. Throw it in.
Yeah. It was kind of a fun practice. I don't know if it was because I don't know if I'm lazy, but I like to think of it as a more efficient way to try and capture that, especially if I didn't want to go in on weekends and I needed a measurement like that. I could just remote in and take a look. Obviously, I like taking advantage of technology to make things as effective as possible. And another thing to kind of keep in mind too, it always comes up as a point of discussion sometimes when I'm working with data scientists, and that is, canopy height versus plant height. Plant height is going to be much easier to track. Hopefully it's uniform enough that the numbers that you are taking are a representation of your crop. So kind of keep that in mind.
Yes, and you have great pictures in your harvest group of just that, the ruler with the plant heights. From Instagram, Cubby204 asks, I'm having problems getting enough calcium and magnesium into my plants. What form of calcium magnesium do you recommend, and should I be foliar feeding or feeding a solution into the pots?
Yeah, interesting. So, in the old days, we always just say add more CalMag, right? If you're not adding enough CalMag, if the problem is that there's just not enough availability of CalMag to the plant, then that's a pretty easy option. the other things that might be going on there is some nutrient reactions that are causing an issue for CalMag uptake. One of the first things that I would probably do is also just try and get a good analysis. Is it a CalMag issue? And I've looked at deficiency and excess charts for the last 8 years now, and probably millions of cannabis plants. I still have sometimes a challenge making sure, making a positive identification of a nutrient deficiency or an excess. It ends up, it's actually caused by a pH issue, or it's some type of environmental factor that's showing in the plants rather than a specific nutrient deficiency or excess. So get yourself a leaf tissue analysis or a sap analysis, and basically get some chemical, some scientific testing validation that is a correct assumption of the case, and then go in from there, because a lot of times I would diagnose something wrong and then end up causing more problems, or just end up chasing my tail. And so having concrete evidence that is the right route to go, then it does give you more options. Start to look at, is it an issue with the plant's uptake? Is it an issue with actual substrate availability? Is there ways that I can mitigate my irrigation techniques in order to make more availability in there? Is everything else in the plant environment healthy? There's a lot of things that we can try and make sure. Are we getting enough light? Do we have enough CO2? Our temperatures and humidities? Do we have a good VPD? Those are all things that, regardless of nutrient balance, should be in check. Otherwise, we're going to see some type of issues with those plants. So maybe take a step back, and then, foliar is always a good way to get, small amounts of any nutrient into the plant. So hopefully those steps are helpful.
I would just add that, sometimes it's really easy to get stuck looking at one lever that you're really comfortable pulling in your grow to make your plants do a specific thing. And I know personally that I have looked at situations before and been convincing myself this has got to be some sort of a nutrient issue. And just like you said, as time goes on, really looking into some more of those environmental factors or some of those irrigation cues has revealed just that some of those other levers maybe were the culprit I needed to be paying more attention to during that period of time.
And most, if you're using a popular 2-part salt nutrient from most suppliers these days, they don't necessarily need the addition of CalMag. So probably, one of the things also would be is talk with your nutrient supplier. Any of the reputable nutrient suppliers these days have pretty good advice as far as, how you can modify sometimes their A/B ratios during specific phases, and other common tricks of the trade with their specific formula.
All right. That is great info, as always. From Instagram, we have a follow-up from Hooker++. Just one clarification. Beyond just PM overall, generally speaking, is a swing to the lower side, let's say dropping humidity by 15% overnight. Would that cause mold, etc., to bloom versus leaving it stable? I guess the root of the question is that I've heard people say VPD doesn't matter at night, but that doesn't seem correct. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked this question. I can dive a little bit deeper. That's kind of what I was mentioning as far as when we were talking about ideal VPDs for the daytime, is we are targeting, plant growth reasons, right? We're looking to optimize our photosynthetic rates, get high levels of transpiration out of that plant. So, when I'll say that, VPD isn't as important at night, well, that's with the caveat that we aren't seeing molds, mildews, any of those issues there. And so, as far as generally speaking, is a swing going to cause that? Well, if a swing to a lower humidity, then absolutely not. Sometimes though, if we are swinging, say, back up to a higher humidity during the daytime, yes, if we swing too quickly, then we can see some types of condensation, and that's defined by our dew point. This is fairly common in greenhouses, especially in the wintertime, when we end up having really cold outside and higher humidities inside. As we do start to swing conditions, we can build up some condensation, and those are areas where molds, mildews, and that type of stuff are really gonna kick in first, right? Anytime that we have a localized area, if water droplet forms, then the humidity at that point is 100%, to make it simply.
Yeah, I was just going to say, local to your area, the times that I've always experienced mold more frequently have been in the winter time. And I live in a super cold area, and that's a huge factor in that. During the winter, when it's very cold outside, the air exchange to the interior ends up, frequently, if the cold air mixes with hot air, hitting that dew point and becoming one of those factors. And just like you said, Jason, big greenhouses are really where you see a lot of that during the colder months of the year.
All right. Jacob from YouTube asks, is it better to let the humidifier bounce between 60 or stay constant? Sorry, let's try this again. Is it better to let the humidifier humidity bounce between 60 to 80 or stay constant at 50 for veg? Thank you guys for your output.
So during veg, I would much rather be a little bit higher humidity like that. Typically, we're running temperatures in that 83 degrees range. Depending on your light sources and other factors, you'll definitely want to be between 80 and 85. And so, in order to have a VPD, and the range is, I like to have a VPD probably 0.7 to 0.9, depending on how late in veg we get. You're going to have those humidities up there, usually around 75%, 70 to 80%. So, great question. Thanks.
All right. From Instagram, Flush Flowers wants to know, what's the ideal PPFD in through stretch? I'm under LEDs at a fixed height. I aim for 1,000 PPFD at day 11, and my plants never get too tall, and I sometimes get minor necrosis where PPFD is at its highest.
1,000 PPFD at day 11 is pretty good target. Some of the kind of most important rules for lighting intensity that I like to follow is, when I come out of veg, I need to make sure that I have increased my lighting intensity that first day of flower. So, we've talked about this a lot, is the plants are, getting photons, and during veg, when they are getting photons, it's for 18 hours. That means we have 6 more hours of energy that's hitting that plant. So with those 6 hours, when we go to a 12-12, we need to make sure that we're getting 30% more light intensity. That's going to get the plant the same amount of energy. It's going to stay on a growth rate, and you're not going to see any transplant stress, as they say. And typically during that time, I like to start bumping up my lighting intensity till I am at that 1,000 PPFD. A couple things there to think about. Necrosis, more often I actually end up seeing light bleaching at those highest intensities. So I kind of ask yourself, all right, is necrosis actually due to the lighting intensity? Because usually, and especially with LEDs, where it's not specifically like a hot spot, if you will, temperature wise, is the actual amount of pigment in the chlorophyll is going to be less if our lighting intensity gets too high. How common that is in your grow room, you might also kind of think about what your lighting design is. If you are at a fixed height, then maybe you either have to start up it a little bit slower, or just raise your heights overall and then increase your LED percentage at that time, so you can maintain those PPFDs, but in a better uniform lighting on the canopy.
All right. We've got one from PNW Farmer. I'm on day 23. Some plants have grown into the light. Would you super crop or turn down the PPFD?
Day 23. Yeah. I'd raise the lights. No, I know that's probably not an option in this situation. That's why they wouldn't be asking. That's why they wouldn't be asking that if they could do this. Yeah, at this point, I'd probably just end up giving the old pinch turn down, and then start thinking about what are ways that you can better control that plant height later on. We were talking earlier here in the show about SOPs on crop registration, specifically for plant height. You might be able to just cut a couple days off veg for that strain. Certain strains they multiply at different levels, post veg. And so make sure you are getting some documentation on that strain. So next time you run it, shave a couple days off of veg. And that can be super helpful, right? Another thing to kind of think about is how are we applying some of our crop steering strategies in order to reduce the actual vertical stretch in the plant, right? Allowing our ECs to stack up, which is effectively reducing our osmotic differential in the plant, and giving it a better chance to develop flowers early on. That's a great tool to help reduce stretch as well. So think about the options that you can work with it, because a lot of times those are actual benefits of a strain, is it's fast growing.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add is for right now, since you can't probably raise that ceiling on them too much, just like Jason said, pinch them, turn them, and watch the heats. It gets hot right there once those plants are right up next to the lights, and that's where you're going to start seeing a couple of those potential issues of necrosis from burning.
All right. We'll have to have a follow-up on that one, PNW farmer. Let's see how that goes for you. Let's see, Canig420 asked, does the Go package support a Coco soil mix?
Sure does. Yeah. So, nice thing about the Go kit, it's same hardware as our commercial options. You get the TEROS 1, which is great for Coco. Pretty much all hydroponic media, it is the best sensor on the market to use for looking at water contents and ECs in the substrate. So, as far as the popularity, I think 90% of our clients are in some type of Coco blend, straight Coco or rockwool.
AROYA, you can use it for a lot of different substrates. Let's see, Chili Wolf from Instagram asked, if I'm running single cultivars per 4x4 table, would individual table runoff monitoring be appropriate, or should I still look to test the odd individual plant on a regular basis? Of course, if I see a plant that has an issue, then I'll check that one individually.
Yeah, check out my growth behavior video on YouTube. It's going to break down some of the challenges of running multiple strains in a small area or in one environment. I guess it depends how much energy you have and what are you really trying to get out of this, right? If your goal is just to try and find the some of the better expressions of the strains that you're getting at, then you can probably get away with just taking one runoff reading. If the strains are not alike and you're trying to basically optimize that genetic potential of those, then you probably are going to want to spend the time and do some readings per plant. For me, the EC of the runoff is really not very important after I've gotten used to using substrate sensors. When I'm using a substrate sensor, I get to see the dynamics of EC throughout the irrigation period, throughout the dryback, overnight, and I can make much better judgment decisions than I can with the EC of the runoff. EC of the runoff, it's very dependent on how much runoff do I have. The thing about the pH, by plant is going to be helpful because certain plants actually take up different nutrients, and depending on the balance of that runoff, you can make some judgment decisions on if we need to up our EC or make other changes to it. So if you are already doing individual treatments to those plants, then it is probably worth taking runoff readings from each.
Always great info from you, Jason. From Instagram, SantaBuds12 asked, what's the main difference between the TEROS 1 and the TEROS 12?
The TEROS 1 has 2 prongs. The TEROS 12 has 3 prongs. That was a joke. Well, I mean, it's not a joke. Like, it actually does. That is one of the differences. Like, if you're just looking at them, the TEROS 1 is going to be a little bit more accurate, specifically with EC at low water contents. So the TEROS 12 is a capacitance type sensor, long tested technology. I've had them in fields for years at a time. Super solid, super durable. The TEROS 1 also has those characteristics. It's extremely rugged built. We manufacture them here in the United States, right out of Pullman, Washington. Not far from my sitting position here. It's just about, 70 or 100 feet behind me is where those are manufactured. They're epoxy, hermetically sealed. So a great sensor, stainless steel prongs. So those are some of the main differences. What is nice about the TEROS 1s is it is a round sensor. And so if you are in a hard pot, you can just use a hole saw to punch through those. Obviously, try not to disturb the substrate too much, but that hole saw is a nice quick way to get it into a substrate.
All right. The Fireman 505 wants to know, can letting my cocoa dry until pots are super light be okay? No wilting, just really dry.
Sure. Yeah. That's fine. Like, one of the hard parts about that is defining what really dry is. And if you are trying to scale, being able to scale in the definition of really dry is a major challenge. That's one of the reasons that using this type of substrate technology like AROYA is so effective when we start growing hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of plants at a time. And, having investors expect projectable output as far as commercial profit goes. When it comes down to smaller scale, it's really nice when we're trying to perfect a genetic, when maybe we don't have enough time to go in and pick up all of the plants and make sure that we're seeing dryback uniformity. And we are looking for, consistent output. So yeah. And if you really want the easy way, you can start, kind of using a scale and then making some assumptions as far as plant weight goes. In certain greenhouse applications, they've used load cells with some programs in there to try and basically evaluate, all right, how much biomass am I adding onto there? And then using weight for water content. Definitely a much more challenging approach and not quite as accurate as using substrate sensors. So, if it works for you, if you don't have a lot of plants to have to do it to, and you don't have to have, you don't have to share that with someone and be like, hey, well, is that one dry or not? Because it's different to everybody, right? So sure. And I guess the point there is if you're not seeing wilting, then you're not hitting temporary wilting point, right? And basically for any of these plants that we're working with, temporary wilting point is what happens when the plant has to work too hard to pull water from the substrate. So the matrix potential is what we're looking at in that substrate, and the plant's applying a vacuum to pull water out of it. And when we have to apply too much vacuum, so too much negative pressure, then that plant can go into temporary wilting point.
I'm just going to add that asking that question is pretty much what led me to AROYA in the first place. How do I walk this thin line where I want to get my plants really dry, but I really don't want to kill any of my root zone?
Right. Great advice. A post from YouTube. Why does nobody talk about EH, Redox potential, the measurement of the availability of protons, since it's the other side of the pH coin?
Why does no one talk about it? I guess there's probably just a little bit less known about it. might be one of the reasons. We got enough stuff to look at that we know quite a bit about. Redox potential is important, and there are good ways to measure it. So if you're at that point, then start writing some scientific documents for us so we all can learn about it too.
Definitely sounds like we need more info there. A question from Dan from Instagram. He thought, hi guys, any tip to increase aroma? I have a strain that has all the checks, but it does not smell. It has a very light odor. I've tried to grow it more generative, but this time it still has the same outcome.
Yeah, more generative probably would have been my first step. If the plant looks super healthy, there is a chance that, doing some foyers of some micros, just making sure that you've got a good micro supply to that. I've found that making sure that we've got a sufficient supply of micros helps with the terpene profiles in plants. I don't necessarily have any secret sauce. Genetics got limited potential, and it's unfortunately there's been a lot of genetics that have not made the cut because they have one checkbox they're missing.
I've thrown away many packs of seeds. Well, and I shouldn't say I threw away the packs of seeds. I flowered them all the way out, but there just wasn't a single winner in the packs, and that's the gamble we take.
Dude, you can't throw seeds out. You got to throw them in your neighbor's bushes.
Good advice to follow.
Just see what pops up. Another question. Final product consistency has dark red hairs. Using salts and LEDs following the program. What's your first thought?
Again, it could be related to the genetics. If it's a genetic that you've run and you haven't seen that, I guess one of my favorite procedures was, as I started getting close to harvest, I would capture a microscope picture. So I had a USB microscope, and I would take a look at the color of the trichomes and the hairs, and actually spec out what exactly day I expected a specific strain to be ripe at. And since we were harvesting in pretty large greenhouses and didn't have a big staff, harvest would usually take us between 2 and 3 days. And so we would actually line up our harvest schedule with which strains were actually at a better ripeness at that day, 70 rather than 71 or 72. We were pretty long cycles back then. So yeah, there's a chance that it is just a little overripe. There's a chance it's simply that genetic. There could be environmental factors at play here as well. It's going to kind of have to come down to a breakdown of, have you seen that strain grow differently than that?
I was just going to say the same thing. I just recently had a harvest come down where a strain that I've grown several times with wonderful results and a really great balanced color came out really similar to other times, but with a hair more orange to the trichome structure when I started looking at it under a scope. And, there were obvious environmental factors in that room during that run in that area that, I can see now where they contributed to how that plant ended. And then I probably harvested it about 2 days later than I have in any of the other rounds. And that can also be another one of those contributing factors, just based on how long that plant wants to be run.
Kind of going down the same road, Rocket Buds Farms asked, trimming pre, during, or after curing?
Yeah, this is one of those things that, can kind of come down to the logistics of your facility and what some of your limiting factors are. I definitely liked having a pretty good strip before we cut the plants, simply just to help with the processing, the quickness of processing, how much we could fit in our dry room at that time. And just helping make sure that we were able to get a good dry through there. Ideally, I would say that bucking at drying and having some pretty good cleanup so that your nugs can all cure together is probably one of the ideal processes there, but it still has to come into play of what y'all can get done at the site.
Yeah, I was going to say, ideals sometimes can go out the window when it comes to what you can accomplish with the resources that you have on hand. And, we all would love to live in ideal situations and have the perfect ability to walk through a perfectly designed, preordained process. But sometimes we're all just working with what we have in terms of the resources that you can summon to be able to accomplish getting any of those single tasks done in the timeline that you need to get them done.
Let us know if you have a follow-up for that one, Rocket Buds Funds. Finley88 reached out on Instagram. I have noticed that my dried nugs are way denser growing in 1 gallon Coco quick fill bags when I grow the same strain in 6-inch Hugos. I can't figure out why. I like to stick with rockwool because it's cleaner, but I prefer the dense flower I get with Coco. Any thoughts on why this might be?
I'm guessing it's going to be related to what kind of water contents that you can see and what your EC is doing. Track what your runoffs look like in both of those, and also start to track how quickly your EC is stacking in that Coco. There's a good chance that you're able to stack your EC a little bit better in that Coco, and that's why you're getting a more generative response from those buds. And then also, make sure that it's not an environmental factor. I think a couple weeks ago we were talking about on here how, nighttime differentials can help buds get dense, making sure that we do have high intensity light levels across the canopy and through the depth of the canopy as well. It's one of the reasons that under canopy has taken off as a popular trend is simply making sure that we have the uniformity at the right environmental levels to ensure uniform healthy buds.
All right. Jedi Little had a question. A suggested process to clean reservoirs. Any magic reliable products to help clean the residue? Using a 275-gallon IBC tote, for better or worse.
Let's see. The magic secrets is hard workers, elbow grease. yeah, making sure that it hasn't been dried on there for too long. So don't leave the tank dried out for way too long, and then just try and go in and scrub it. And if you do that, maybe try to spray the walls down. Use cleaning agents like bleach, hypochlorous acid, chlorine dioxide. Any of those things are going to kind of help break down any of the mineral buildup in your batch tank and sterilize it.
Yeah, I was just going to say, don't ever let that stuff dry on there hard. You'll be very upset with yourself about that decision.
Yep, scrubbing. Mike is looking for advice. Planting density for 1 gallon quick fill Coco bags.
Not quite enough information there to make a really helpful recommendation. Kind of as a general rule of thumb for my growing style, is usually around 0.6 plants per square foot. It's going to be extremely genetic dependent. It's going to be dependent on what my lighting looks like, what my airflow in the room is, how long I'm trying to get this stuff turned. Think of those things, and I guess one of the easiest ways to know whether you have done a good density or not is by looking at light penetration. So are you seeing lots of larvae on the buds below? Are you getting any powdery and mildew? Yeah, those things. There's just not enough airflow through the canopy, right? And we're not seeing uniformity because we have too much canopy density. And then also have to consider how much labor do you have to spare for doing de-leafing practices and pruning practices, right? And if we don't have a lot of that, then we are going to have to end up with a wider plant spacing.
Yep. I was just going to kind of go along with that. I've experimented quite a bit the last few rounds that I've run with the 1 gallon Coco bags and kind of gone back and forth but the answer I've come to is pretty much the same. 0.5 to 0.6 per square foot seems like the magic number where the labor is reasonable, the airflow seems to be manageable, and I don't have to go through and have people touch the plants quite as much as I do at some of the other densities. And it seems like everything grows with just enough space that it can be happy and get that airflow and be able to have those uniform temperature differentials that Jason's talking about.
All right. On the topic of bud rot, what's the line between botrytis and an OK VPD at a higher temp and humidity? I just found bud rot on one bud and didn't see it on the others, but I'm concerned. We lost AC and the tent's been struggle bussing.
The old struggle bussing. Yeah, I don't know. It's probably, there's always that fine line, especially if you are running on limited equipment. Sometimes as we are getting towards the end, it's better to thin out the buds, send some of that to a blowout, concentrate it, whatever, than it is to end up with that and all of it and try and salvage a poor flower crop. So, as I mentioned earlier, the certain strains are going to be much more resilient to botrytis, and certain grow facilities actually have a facility down the road where they specifically run genetics that are much more resilient to that type of stuff. So yeah, I don't know where that fine line is. It sounds like probably here it is worth getting your AC tuned up though, so that you have a little bit better options, and you aren't putting yourself in a tough position where you have to make a decision of what to do with the crop.
We've got a live one from YouTube. Tommy in the Trees wants to know, if you have to start flower at a low PPFD around 400, what is an ideal daily increase in PPFD?
I guess I would first ask myself is, why do I have to do that?
I was just going to say that same thing.
But I guess that doesn't answer the question very good. Yeah, it does. I guess it depends also why did you have to do that? I like to be at, around 1,000 PPFD by day 10 of flower, definitely. So, what that's going to be 50 PPFD a day, or 100 PPFD every couple of days to get you there. Yep.
Tommy in the Trees, any follow up on that one? Let us know. Can only get up to around 350 in veg room.
Yeah, so you're fortunate enough here. You actually get to use one of those principles that I was talking about of increasing your light intensity by 30%. So let's see, 30% on 350. So yeah, I'd be comfortable starting my flower in around 500 ppfd if I was at 350 in veg. So it's a little bit of help, maybe.
I was going to say, yeah, pretty similar. Mine go from about 350 to 400 in their veg into their flower, and I usually start that up at about 500 to 550, depending on how resilient the plants seem and how well they've done with transitioning into higher light quicker in that particular cultivar before.
All right. Eric Burkholder asks, when is the last time I should water before harvest?
Some people have, talked about not watering the day that you harvest. That's fine. It's great and wonderful. Sure, you can save some water and maybe a little bit of nutrients. I honestly don't think it's going to make a big impact. In something like rockwool, I definitely wouldn't go any more than I would irrigate it the day before you harvest for sure. And Coco, irrigate the day before you harvest. Absolutely. The last thing that we want is some amount of plant unhealthiness right before we harvest, because that can definitely cause some hot spots for molds and mildews for botrytis as those plants are drying.
All right. Well, with that, I think we're going to wrap it up here. Thanks, Jason and Cian, and our co-producer, Chris. I'm like the co-moderator. Sorry, guys. Hang out with me here for another great session. And thank you for joining us for this week's AROYA office hours. To learn more about AROYA, book a demo at AROYA.io, and our team will show you the ins and outs of the ultimate cannabis cultivation platform. Got crop steering or cultivation questions you want to cover? Drop them anytime in the AROYA app. Email us at sales@aroya.io or send us a DM via Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn. We want to hear from you. And if you're a fan of the pod, please leave us a review on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts. We appreciate your feedback, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you never miss an episode. And we'll see you at episode 119.